Boom. Hello, and welcome to the Rock Metal Podcast. I am your host, John Harris. On my left-hand side is my right-hand man, Gabriel.
I'm in the wrong side.
You're on the wrong side. Okay. Today on the Rock Metal Podcast, we have Wilderun, who has a new album called Veil of Imagination, which is re-released on July 17th via Century Media Records. Right now I'm being joined by Dan to share some more information about this re-release, the signing to Century Media Records, as well as to chat about some of the tracks off of the album as well. So Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Very great to have you on. I really dig this stuff, and I'm super excited that you guys were available to chat. Now, I guess let's just jump into the juicy stuff. Tell us about getting signed to Century Media and what led to the re-release, I guess, as opposed to just starting off with maybe an EP or something of new material.
Well, we had originally looked for a label to release Veil on. We had the material, like the final mixes and stuff, were done close to a year before we had self-released it back in November. And we just kept trying to, we had a lead here and a lead there, and somebody at the label would listen to it and be like, oh, I really dig it. Let me bring it to the team and see if I can make something happen. And then just things would kind of fall apart or they would disappear. So then we decided, okay, well, we can't wait any longer. We're just going to have to do the self-release thing again. So we ended up hiring a PR company this time, which was something we didn't do before. And that seemed to really help push the album into a lot of the right hands, I think, and just get it into more media outlets that we might otherwise not have been able to access. So we had the album out for a few months, and we got the opportunity to play 70,000 Tons of Metal this January. And by the time we got announced for that, we played the shows, and then we got off the boat, and sitting in our inbox were emails from Century Media as well as a couple other labels. And so it was just kind of a couple months after that, negotiating with these different labels and figuring out who's got the best deal for us, not only financially, but also who's the most excited about the band, and really we get the sense that their interest in the band on an artistic level, and Century Media was by far the most enthusiastic. And one of the things that we were very adamant about was that Veil would be re-released by whatever label we choose. There were some who said, oh, well, we don't really find re-releases to be advantageous. They don't really bring in a lot, and we'd just rather start with a new album when you're ready for that. And for us, that was just kind of a non-starter. So Century Media said, okay, great, let's do the re-release, and then we'll set you up for X amount of albums after that. We finally came to all our terms, got everything together, all our materials, and now the album is finally going to come out again in physical form, which it's been sold out since on our end since December. A month after we released it, we sold out of the 1,000 CDs we printed. And then, so now it's finally getting printed on vinyl too, which is something we've been wanting to do since our inception.
That's such a cool word. Since our inception, we want it to be on vinyl. No, I mean, there's so much great news in that story, especially for anybody who's in a band listening in right now and is on the fence about hiring somebody to push you out there. And I know that I chat about it a lot because the number of bands who are on the show that come through a respected media outlet or a PR person, even hired by labels. So some labels do their own PR, and other labels just hire rogue PR people to do it, kind of depending on the size of the label. And they reach out to media people like me, and then we get you on the show, and it gets you into the hands of some of the right people. And it almost seems like even though they liked your music, the idea of you taking that next step to push it yourselves, I don't know, made you seem more serious? Is that kind of maybe what you think?
Probably. I think because because the A&R guy that we were talking to at Century Media, he was saying that like he was aware of us for a little while already at that point, and as were some of the other people at the label, and I think it was just the idea that like we came out with a record that I feel and they feel is the best we've done. But also that, yeah, we're okay. We're going to invest some money in the actual promotion. We're just going to keep trying to build this machine up. And every album we do, we keep being like, okay, well, what can we improve on? Luckily, we're in the position where every album we've done, we've had more money under our belts with which to do it. So part of that money went specifically towards let's hire PR because. Frankly, I mean, we were sick of doing it ourselves, and obviously there's certain roadblocks that we can't cross on our own.
Yeah. And oddly enough, as soon as you said that, because I've got the lyric video up for The Tyranny of Imagination, and as soon as you said that, the lyric line, oh my goodness gracious, I can't. Timidly you strive into the distance where the unknown beckons you. I don't know. It seemed like as you were telling your story and then that lyric line came up, there was just that moment of grace where that lyric line in that moment really seemed to embody going after your dreams.
It does seem like, yeah. I mean, I never made that connection, but I think there's a lot of things. I mean, no, like especially our last two records, they're all the lyrics are all kind of written from a introspective perspective. So I think these things that we feel and how they relate to Wilderun are going to naturally make their way into the music because it's all kind of coming from the same place and it's all being funneled through the Wilderun machine as well. So it's kind of interesting to think about it in that perspective because I never have. It's
just, microscopically just sucking one lyric line completely out of context. But the interesting thing is, as I was watching the lyric video and listening to you, that line came up and it was like this very positive intersection. And I mean, something else you mentioned too is, and I work with a lot of labels, and yeah, a lot of times they hate the idea of a re-release, but then occasionally I'll see a label that says, hey, we've signed this band and we're going to re-release their first album, sometimes even as far as 2 or 3 years ago. And it just kind of always shocks me and surprises me because usually what you hear is, well, that's old news. We don't want anything to do with it. So that's why I was super curious, to hear from you. Like, sweet, not only are you, with Century Media Records, which is an awesome record label that I've had the privilege of working with for a couple of years now, but also as well, they're going to go ahead and re-release what I consider to be some incredible stuff. So it just seems like a really solid alignment. Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it's our relationship with them is still early, and we're still kind of getting to know the ropes of how it all works, working with the label. And I mean, there's just so many people involved, and we kind of like, okay, well, I have this question to ask Century Media, who's the right person to talk to? But luckily, like I sent an email to anybody on the team, and if they don't have the answer, they just forward it over to the person who does. I mean, everyone there seems to be really on their game. They're quick to respond, and they just seem to know what's right for the band. And I don't get the sense that they don't understand Wilderun, which is something that we've dealt with for almost our entire career, has been trying to get people to understand what Wilderun is, because we approach things in a really different way from a lot of metal bands, I think. Now, when you say that you approach things differently than a lot of metal bands, and I mean, obviously we listen to the music and we can definitely hear something unique. However, I'd like you to expand on that, especially with regard to Veil of Imagination. You mentioned something you mentioned is, each time you get a bit more money, which is totally unusual for a band. Like, you guys have more money. It's weird. So a metal band. Let's not. We're no Ghost or anything like that. So a metal band that's making money. This is fantastic. So take us through, or unless it's just a Veil of Imagination, but that's the Tyranny of Imagination. When you're far from where dreams unfurl. But I guess really the question is, so take us through this album, because obviously it's important to you guys. And what did you guys set out to create? And I mean, is there a concept at all to the album? I mean, these are multi-syllabic words that have been placed together in a cacophony of an arrangement. So how is Veil of Imagination different from what's going on right now in metal?
Well, I think the first thing that always comes to mind for me, because it's the thing I deal with the most. I'm one of myself and Wayne, the other orchestrator. We deal the most on the production side, and we're kind of, because we both do production work as well, and we understand how it works. Like, we're communicating with engineers both live and in the studio, and the thing that we always have to kind of rewire in any engineer's brain is that the rhythm guitar is not more important than the orchestra. So when we're playing live, we always have to tell the sound guy, if we're working with them for the first time, like, turn the orchestra way up, no more. Like, it seems weird because, like, oh, they're just the backing tracks. It's like, well, no, they're part of the structure of the song, and it's all intertwined. They're supposed to be part. Essentially, I sometimes dislike using the phrase orchestra to describe that instrumentation within our music, because the whole thing is the orchestra, essentially. That's the way we approach it. It's not that we write a metal song and we're like, now let's make it epic by just throwing some keys behind it.
Violins! I need 1,000 didgeridoos.
Exactly, right. It's like, okay, yeah, that's a quick way to make something sound bigger in a sense, but you can do it in ways that are more intelligent and more thought out, and will expand your palette with which you can paint that picture. Because, like, there's so much space to work with, and metal bands especially, I find, utilize very little of the dynamic range that exists. I mean, people will compare metal often to like orchestral music or classical music, which I always find a kind of not totally accurate comparison. And by that I mean, like, you go to see an orchestra play, and they can play, like, the quietest thing where you have to, like, lean in to hear it, and then they can just blow you away with just something that sounds like there's 1,000 amps on stage. And metal bands, they go up there, and I mean, this is inherently part of the problem of just having amplified guitars. There's only maybe so much dynamic range you have on that instrument, but you can still write a song that goes from 0 to 100, like, we don't have to hover at 85 as our default.
Okay. I mean, you brought up so many incredibly interesting things, especially since I've been reading, recently I've been reading a book from Bruce Sweden, who's the mix engineer for Michael Jackson. For anybody who doesn't know, he's responsible for having engineered Billie Jean, not necessarily the production of it, because that was Quincy Jones, but worked hand in hand with Quincy on a lot of stuff. And something that he said in part of his development in any genre of music was the fact that he grew up going to the orchestra. Yeah. And
I did too. Yeah. It's hugely influential.
And so what music is supposed to sound like, what movement's supposed to sound like. And, a note that I made, because we do some mix engineering as well, and we've definitely had some bands come in with some orchestra parts, and I've had to point out that their orchestration doesn't work with the song. And I think without that knowledge of an orchestra, if people don't understand that orchestras are on their own time, they're not exactly on a grid, so that produces an issue. Mm-hmm. And what the instruments in the orchestra do. What does a violin do? Why is it there? What does a trumpet do? And why is it there? And how do you make those two talk to each other and work together? And I think if you have that sense of understanding, then even writing just with guitars and basses becomes more cohesive, because how many guitar players know why they're there to begin with? What purpose does the guitar have in a metal mix? Right.
No, I mean, I think that, like, we as metal musicians, we grow up writing material that's meant, or is at least imagined, being on stage with, between 3 to maybe 6 people. And even if you introduce keyboards or things that are playing orchestral parts or backing tracks, you still have that idea in your head, and you think like, oh, how are we going to play this live and stuff like that, and I think it gets distracting, and I think it takes away from the idea that like within this thing that you're calling the orchestra, there are an infinite amount of sounds that you can explore and how they react and or interact with the band elements. There's so much there that is unexplored, and we still feel like we've barely scraped the surface on what's possible there.
Well, just got to peel back that veil on the imagination. Beautiful. And if you want to check out the tracks, Tyranny of Imagination and Far From Where Dreams Unfurl, there's, I believe, a studio video for Far From Where Dreams Unfurl, and then there is a lyric video for the Tyranny of Imagination. You can check out both of those on today's show notes at www.therockandrollpodcast.ca. And I guess, since we spent so much time chatting about the album and many of the dynamics went into it and the exciting news about partnership with Century Media. So again, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome. The only other thing I think I can ask is basically coming out of lockdown and having spent the first about 6 months of the year completely pooched, what's the plan coming out of here? This episode will air probably about like late July. So what other news maybe can we expect for the next couple of months from Wilderun?
Well, one thing that's being announced soon, and is our manager told us that it can be made public, is that we will be the opening act on the upcoming Soilwork European tour at the end of next year, 2021. So that's, as of right now, our only like solid plan that we have. That's like, okay, that's booked, and hopefully everything's back to normal by then, and we can make that tour happen. Well, we still have to figure out when we're gonna do the tour we're going to do back in April with Aeternum, because that's postponed. So trying to fit that into our schedule, as well as hopefully getting into the studio next year as well to record a new record. Hopefully. Provided that we can actually finish it in time.
Yeah. Well, with a label barking down your neck, I think you'll be able to do it this time. Beautiful.
Well, luckily, they don't seem too pushy, but I think we feel more confident now that we can get things done quicker because we don't have to run around in circles wondering how it's going to be released.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And when bands ask what my experience chatting with bands when they're on a label is like, I say, well, they seem significantly more calm and confident. And if I get asked why that is, I just say, because there's no longer the stress of guesswork. Yeah.
Well, because self-release takes, if you're self-releasing, it takes all the same amount of work that the Century Media is doing. And your bandwidth is obviously limited, especially if you're going to try and keep releasing albums in any sort of reasonable time frame. It took 4 years for Veil to come out since the last record, and we don't want to take another 4 years again, especially where we have material in the works now. So why dilly-dally?
Yeah, abso-freaking-lutely. All right. Well, Dan, unless there's anything else that you wanted to throw out there that I did not bring up or that you wanted to chat about, I just wanted to thank you for coming on to the Rock Metal Podcast.
Thanks for having me. It was a good time. Good questions.
Oh, thanks, mister.
You're welcome, sir.
Go ahead. Stop, please, sweetie.